Hi everyone, answering another question here in the video today. As per usual, nothing I'm saying should be construed as medical advice. This is for informational purposes only. If you need medical advice, please talk to your healthcare provider to get that advice. So the question, I think there's a couple of questions weaved in here, but it says it's advisable to stay on herbs a month, if not a year after in remission, to be sure the Borrelia won't come back. So what if I'm going into remission and decide to use certain herbal medications for the rest of my life? Will it then come back? Not talking about a new tick bite here, or will there be a familiarization with the medicine so it'll stop being potent? And then I think it changes topics a little bit here, so I'll kind of address that first. So it's a really good question. I mean, with my patients, I've had some patients who have been on these antimicrobial herbal formulas for a few years. In some extreme cases, it's quite rare they need to be on them for that long, but I do have some patients who've been on them for probably about 2-3 years. I don't know if anyone's been on them for longer, but quite a long time. And I haven't had any cases to date that I can think of where the herbs seem to just lose their potency. In those cases, typically the patient had improved, they'd seen benefit from the herbs, otherwise we would have dropped them like a hot potato a lot sooner. And they, so seeing benefit from the herbs, but then the patient maybe hit a plateau. And so we started treating mold or heavy metals, or started using low-dose immunotherapy, or started supporting their mitochondria more comprehensively, or whatever it was that we did. But we kept the herbs in the mix because they seemed to be helping, but the patient hit kind of a plateau point. And maybe in some cases we tried weaning them off the herbs and they felt worse again, or maybe in some cases the patient just preferred to stay on them just kind of for good measure. It's somewhat a little bit of a safety net or safety blanket a little bit for some folks. And if they're not doing any harm, it's like, okay, we can keep those in there. But I haven't had any patients that I can think of where they went on the herbs, we were seeing certain benefits, and then after X number of months or maybe years, in these few odd cases that need to be on there for a very long time, that they just seem to stop working, and then we had to switch them up to different herbs, and then they started working better again. That type of thing does happen with antibiotic therapy, to my understanding, but my understanding of it, or my understanding of it / my clinical rationale around it, is that herbs are just so diverse that when you take an herbal compound like an herbal tincture or something like that, there are so many different phytochemicals in there, and every batch is going to be a bit different, that I think it's really hard for the microbes to become acclimatized to them, unlike, say, penicillin or azithromycin or doxycycline, where it's just the same molecule over and over and over again. And so I think that the drug resistance that we see to different antibiotics makes more sense or it stands to reason why it'd be harder for a microbe to become resistant to an herb than it would be to become resistant to a pharmaceutical antimicrobial. With that being said, when one pulses antibiotics with the right types of protocols and all that, you can avoid antimicrobial resistance, to my understanding, quite effectively. But that I believe is why we're not seeing the sort of reduction in efficacy over time of those herbs if people are on them for a long time. So I think that's I think that was the nature of your question. So if you're asking something else and I didn't quite answer it, please feel free to post it in the comments, and I will happily mention it or address it in another video. The question goes on to say, I did chelation therapy last week and I'm still smelling tremendously. Yikes. Is this a sign I need to do more sessions? Would the smell get better if there's less and less heavy metals in the body? So again, I can't give you any direct advice over social media. Please ask your healthcare provider about that. What I can say, though, on this topic is that it's not that often that patients will report a smell associated with their bodies, or more commonly their bodily secretions, like my urine smells metallic, or my urine smells like this or that, or every once in a while, like my bowel movements smell atypical following chelation therapy. It doesn't happen that often. Proportionately, it's probably less than 1% of patients, if I had to estimate. But when that does happen, what I have found is that it does eventually get less and less, presumably as the heavy metal burden is going down. So I've definitely seen that. I haven't had any cases to date that I can think of where there was, a smell associated with the chelation therapy, and then the smell just always persisted. I've always seen it go away. And let's see here. What will be your top 3 herbs for Borrelia and Babesia together? Right now, taking stevia and cryptolepis, but want to add more to the regimen. So I do have some other videos on this if anyone's interested and want to hear about this in more detail. You can certainly check those out if you're so inclined. As I've said in some other videos, in general, I tend to take quite a broad spectrum approach when it comes to going after microbes. I'm a huge fan of the work of Stephen Buhner. I passed away maybe a year and a half ago now or so, give or take. Just a brilliant, prolific writer. And looking at his material, which I would say is the authoritative sort of synopsis of a lot of these herbs that we use to go after systemic microbes, according to his material, which is all based on the research evidence that's out there, and as well as historical uses of herbs and whatnot. To my understanding, a lot of these herbs that we use have a multitude of benefits. So say the cryptolepis that was mentioned in the question, we know that based on the research literature, at least in vitro studies, that cryptolepis is arguably the most potent herb against Borrelia, Bartonella, and Babesia. So like, what a great multitasker. Japanese knotweed, we know that it has antimicrobial effects against a wide range of different microbes, including Borrelia. Say something like Houtunia, it's an antiviral herb, but we know clinically, at least, that it has an impact against Bartonella, Mycoplasma. So like, there's a lot of 3-for-1, 4-for-1, maybe 5-for-1 herbs that are out there. And so the approach that I take is not to say, oh, you have Babesia, I'm going to just pick these particular herbs. My approach is more, you have Babesia based on symptoms, test results, whatever it is, but we don't know if there might be other co-infections as well. There might be Borrelia as well. So I usually take the approach of, let's just use a broad spectrum approach, regardless of what comes up on the test results, regardless of what the clinical picture looks like, and why not just pick herbs that have a multitude of effects against a wide range of different microbes. So what I usually do, again, as I've mentioned in other videos, so please check those out if you want more detail about that, is I will typically use a combination of 8 different herbs simultaneously, usually in an herbal tincture form. We will use powders if folks can't or won't consume alcohol for whatever reason, but those herbs are Japanese knotweed, Chinese skullcap, Houtunia, cat's claw, cryptolepis, Sida acuta, Alcornia, and Isatis. I think I've got them all there. Hopefully I didn't say any of those twice. So those are my top recommendation herbs and for my patients who are dealing with systemic infections. Sorry, I can't talk about specific dosages on social media. It's construed by our regulatory colleges as medical advice. And as I said, I can't give any medical advice over social media, but those are my top herbs. So in terms of like, what are my top 3 herbs for Borrelia and Babesia together? I mean, if I was, down to only being able to pick 3 herbs, then I would definitely go with cryptolepis, Japanese knotweed, and I mean, they're all so good. It's like picking my favorite child, just impossible. But if I had to choose, I'd say probably like Alcornia or Sida if I was really painted into a corner and had to choose. But I personally believe, from my clinical experience and what I understand about herbal medicine, that using a combination of more than 3 herbs would typically likely be more effective, in part because we're casting a broader net, and in part because we get a synergy of the various components of those different herbs. But with that being said, if anyone listening is so inclined to comment on the video, if you've had experience where like, oh, I used just 1 or 2 herbs and like that seemed to work better for me than using a multitude of herbs, or you've had an experience similar to mine where a multitude of herbs seem to be better, please post in the comment section below. I hope that this answered your questions. Thanks for asking the questions, and if anybody has any questions on this topic or anything else, just post in the comment section below and I'll do my best to answer as soon as I can.